The Thousand-Star War had become the defining chronicle of the galaxy. It had begun so long ago that no one remembered the original spark that ignited it. Some claimed it was a dispute over resources. Others whispered of a minor territorial disagreement that escalated uncontrollably. By the time the first human ship slipped quietly through the outer systems, the conflict had already spanned 6 centuries, devouring entire sectors of space and leaving star systems barren. Billions of lives had been extinguished, entire civilizations erased from the charts, and yet the war persisted. Like a tumor in the heart of the galaxy, it consumed everything indiscriminately. The Vora Dominion and the Kethra Ascendancy, the 2 superpowers at the center of the chaos, were locked in an endless cycle of attack and retaliation. Each had built fleets so massive and weapons so powerful that entire planets had been flattened, moons shattered, and colonies turned to molten slag merely to prove a point. Space between their borders was a war-torn graveyard, shattered ships, drifting debris, and the lingering echoes of civilizations long since destroyed. Even the war itself had become mechanical, routine, a clockwork slaughter executed with terrifying efficiency, as if some ancient god had decreed that the galaxy must suffer forever. In the outer sectors, the smaller species fared no better. The desperate pleas for neutrality, the frantic evacuations to the galactic rim, and the futile attempts to hide in uncharted star systems all ended the same way. The war's shadow reached everywhere, and none were spared. Refugee fleets were destroyed, diplomatic envoys obliterated, and supply lines cut off. The galaxy was a crucible of fear, and all who dwelled within it had learned to live beneath the constant specter of annihilation. Humanity had long since withdrawn. Sol, once a growing hub of interstellar diplomacy and trade, had retreated behind layers of distortion fields, cloaking arrays, and hyperspace concealment. Human colonies disappeared from star charts, their presence erased so completely that many younger species assumed they had been extinguished in some internal collapse centuries earlier. The myths of humanity persisted, whispered stories of the vanished soul race, of a species whose rise had been cut short by hubris or disaster. They were spoken of as ghosts, fools, or relics of a time when the galaxy was simpler and weaker. No one in the warring sectors believed humans would ever return. And then the ripple came. It was almost imperceptible at first, a subtle distortion in hyperspace readings, a flicker on sensors so faint that many commanders dismissed it as interference. The anomaly appeared above the fringes of the Kethra Ascendancy's controlled space, where scouts monitored border skirmishes and trade routes. It did not register as a fleet. It did not move like a conventional ship. It was a ripple, a shimmer, a disruption in the very fabric of the void. Then, slowly, impossibly, the human ship emerged. It was unlike any vessel the galaxy had ever catalogued. Its form was sleek, angular, and terrifyingly minimalistic black as the void, matter, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Veins of silver coursed across its hull, glowing softly and pulsating with a rhythm that seemed almost alive. Every sensor reading was incomprehensible. Energy fluxes spiked to theoretical infinities, and then plummeted to zero, only to spike again. Communications arrays detected no identifiable signature. The ship was alive, but it was not alive in any way the galaxy could comprehend. The ship transmitted a single, calm message. Do not fire. We are here to stop this war. Commanders on both sides laughed. They assumed it was a prank, a malfunction, a sensor error, or some trivial bluff. The Vora admiral laughed aloud over the comm channels. The Kethra warlord scoffed, opening targeting arrays on instinct, confident that a single human vessel could be destroyed before it could even react. Neither side considered that perhaps humans were not the species they remembered from myths, fragile, inconsequential, easily ignored. Humans had learned patience. Humans had learned observation. Humans had learned how to survive when no one thought they could. And after centuries of silence, they had returned not to negotiate, not to beg, not to surrender, but to act. The human vessel did not flinch as weapons were aimed. Missiles streaked toward it. Energy beams lanced the void in its direction, and yet every projectile curved away at impossible angles, deflected by forces unknown. Star crackers and super-heavy ion beams passed through it harmlessly, as though the ship existed slightly out of phase with the rest of the universe. Sensors overloaded. Navigational systems failed. Every system the fleets used to coordinate their attacks rendered useless by a principle they could not understand. The fleets froze. Shock rippled from command decks to the most junior officers. A single, silent human vessel, a ship no larger than a destroyer, stood in the center of a galactic battlefield that had spanned 6 centuries, unscathed, unharmed, untouchable. The human vessel's presence alone radiated authority. It did not shout. It did not fire. It did not demand. Yet the entire galaxy recognized its command. It was a singular truth, delivered without words. The humans had returned, and they were not the species the galaxy had underestimated. In that instant, the myths, the stories, and the assumptions about humanity shattered. The galaxy that had treated them as ghosts, fools, or relics of history now faced something they could not categorize. They were patient but relentless, silent but devastating, ordinary until the moment they were not. The war, the 1,000-star war, that had lasted longer than most species' entire histories, would never be the same. For the first time in 6 centuries, every fleet, every commander, every species paused and realized a terrifying truth. Humanity was back. Humanity had observed, learned, and waited. Humanity had prepared. And the galaxy had misjudged them. A single ripple in space, a single black vessel, had already begun to rewrite the rules of war. The myths had underestimated them. The historians had forgotten them. The galaxy's arrogance had blinded itself. Humans were here, and they had every intention of turning the tide. The first human vessel glided through the battlefield like a phantom, a shadow of impossibility against the gleaming armadas of the Vora Dominion and the Kethra Ascendancy. The fleets, once locked in ceaseless combat, now paused as if the universe itself had ordered them to hold. Ships that had spent centuries perfecting their weaponry were rendered inert before a vessel smaller than any battleship in either armada. The human ship's matty black hull absorbed light, reflecting none, and veins of shifting silver ran along its surface, like blood flowing in frozen time. It radiated calm. It radiated purpose. It radiated certainty. The human vessel spoke once more over the universal comm frequencies, its voice calm, clear, and unmistakably human. Do not fire. We are here to stop this war. The Vora Dominion's admiral laughed, his voice booming over comms, echoing across millions of vessels. A single human ship commands us. Absurd, a relic of history. You would parley with ghosts. The Kethra warlord scoffed, activating the primary targeting arrays on his flagship. They have nothing. Their weapons are weak. Their ships are toys. We will crush this, whatever it is, before it even reacts. The humans did not move. They did not respond to threats with threats. They did not display fear or arrogance. They simply glided, their engines silent, their trajectory unerring, their presence immutable. The first salvo hit. Plasma lances streaked across the void. Graviton torpedoes detonated in shimmering waves. Ion beams surged with destructive intent. In the fleet's own records, every single weapon should have obliterated the human vessel in seconds. Every calculation predicted a flash of light, a scattering of debris, a victory signal to the admirals. None of it happened. The weapons passed through the vessel, as though it existed a fraction out of phase with the universe. Sensors overloaded. Targeting computers failed. Every ship in both fleets reported energy fluctuations that defied physics. Kinetic feedback loops spiked to impossible levels. Beams bent around the ship. Explosions froze midair. Missiles came to a halt in their approach, spinning lazily before being absorbed into nothingness. For the first time in 6 centuries, the galactic battlefield went silent not with peace, but with awe and terror. Commanders barked orders. Fleet captains screamed. Admirals cursed and prayed in equal measure. The humans did not flinch. They glided forward, slicing the void between the two empires, as if measuring distance in patience instead of fear. Their trajectory brought them to the exact midpoint of the battle, and they hovered there. Then the ship emitted a pulse. It was not a weapon. It did not explode or shred matter. Instead, energy flowed outward in perfect silence, bending space and time in subtle ripples. Every active weapon system within 500 light-years immediately powered down. Reactors stalled. Engines cut out. Guidance systems failed. Communications arrays crashed. Star crackers, gravity lances, and plasma cannons all froze mid-charge. Ships drifted helplessly, suspended in a void that had once been ablaze with fire and fury. The human voice cut through the silence. Calm, absolute, authoritative. This war ends now. The fleets did not respond. They could not. All calculations, all technologies, all tactical doctrines of the galaxy's most powerful empires had failed in a single instant. Their arrogance, their centuries of preparation, their belief in inevitability, it had all been illusions. The Vora admiral trembled, staring at the human ship. What are you?" he whispered. The human vessel did not answer with weapons. It did not boast. Instead, it projected holographic images across every fleet in the region. They were not aggressive. They were precise, clear, undeniable. Entire planets reduced to molten rubble, star systems collapsing into chaos, billions of lives lost across the galaxy. The images scrolled in silence, a visual ledger of the consequences of continued war, presented not with malice but with cold logic. The message was unmistakable. The human ship had the capability to end the conflict immediately. Every strike, every weapon, every fleet now hung under the weight of a single choice. The humans did not demand obedience. They demanded reason. They demanded an end. For hours, both fleets remained frozen, unsure whether to fire, to retreat, or to flee. Every commander, from the most junior officer to the supreme warlord, felt the same crushing certainty. They were in the presence of something beyond comprehension. Humanity had returned, and this return was not casual, nor careless, nor mercifully ignorant. It was deliberate. The human ship moved again, closer to the center of the battlefield. Not in attack, not in aggression, but in quiet, undeniable authority. Sensors still could not penetrate its shielding. Weapons still could not reach it. Time itself seemed to bend around its path, creating pockets where nothing moved except the ship. The Kethra warlord tried to command his fleet. Fire! Concentrate on it. Destroy it. Every weapon failed. Every system ignored orders. Every calculation proved irrelevant. The realization rippled across the fleets like a shockwave. The humans were not just surviving, they controlled the battlefield itself. The galaxy had misjudged them. The myth of humanity as weak, insignificant, and irrelevant dissolved instantly. A species that had been whispered about as ghosts, fools, or forgotten relics had returned not as victims, not as negotiators, not as pawns, but as a force capable of reshaping the very war itself with a single ship. And in that moment, all across the battlefield, fear and awe intertwined. The human vessel, silent and steady, had begun to turn the tide of a 6th-century war. The galaxy realized, collectively, that everything it had believed about humans had been wrong. They were not fragile. They were not inconsequential. They were not a myth. They were inevitable. The fleets hung in silent paralysis, suspended in the void like monuments to their own arrogance. For the first time in 6 centuries, the Vora Dominion and the Kethra Ascendancy faced a threat that could not be countered by firepower, strategy, or numbers. Their own weapons were helpless, their calculations worthless, their centuries of technological supremacy meaningless. And at the center of it all, the human ship, unassuming, small, nearly fragile in appearance, hovered with quiet authority. The human vessel's pulse spread, rippling outward in invisible waves that scrambled systems, bent energy fields, and warped space-time around it. The pulse did not harm life. It did not tear ships apart. It simply commanded, and the galaxy obeyed. Weapons froze. Engines stalled. Shields collapsed. Entire armadas drifted, silent and immobile, as if time itself had been momentarily rewritten. Then the human ship projected a new message, holographic and expansive, stretching across both fleets with flawless clarity. It was not aggressive, but undeniable. Images of entire star systems reduced to ash, billions of lives extinguished, entire civilizations erased. It was a ledger of consequences, the brutal truth of what continued war demanded. The message was simple, a moral calculus framed by the cold precision of the human mind. Stop fighting or suffer the consequences. Commanders reeled. Admirals screamed into comms that were already dead. Fleet officers scrambled to find any loophole, any escape, any tactical advantage. There was none. Every system failed simultaneously. Every weapon malfunctioned simultaneously. Every starship, from the smallest cruiser to the massive capital ships, was rendered helpless. The humans did not attack. They had not fired a shot. They had only arrived, and the galaxy, in its arrogance, had not even noticed the blade at its throat until the moment it was already across their chests. The Vora admiral whispered into the comm channel, almost to himself, "This cannot be possible. No species, no single vessel could wield this much control." A calm human voice cut across the void. "We do not wish to harm. We wish only to end the war." Your fleets will stand down. The Kithra warlord's claws twitched in disbelief. This is impossible. How can a single vessel? He never finished. The human ship's pulse had already reached the heart of his flagship. Systems flickered. Weapons shut down. The ship's massive gravitic drives stuttered and went silent. The bridge, where the warlord had arrogantly presided, became an echo chamber of helpless alarms and powerless operators. The human ship had not attacked it, had imposed control. It had shown mastery over forces the galaxy believed untouchable. The fleets had been neutralized without a single casualty. Ships floated inert. Weapons cooled. Energy flowed where it would not, obeyed commands the galaxy could not comprehend. And yet there was no malice, no revenge, no satisfaction, just purpose. The human vessel projected another message, this time with even more stark clarity, the visual proof of destruction caused by the war itself. Worlds that had once thrived now lay in ash. Species that had flourished for millennia were gone. Star systems were silent, their suns still burning, but their civilizations extinguished. The holographic images scroll across fleets and commanders alike, a vision of what would continue if the war persisted. The humans were offering the galaxy a choice: stop or be reshaped entirely. A tremor ran through every species present. For centuries, they had relied on numbers, on weapons, on strategies, on fear. And now they understood that none of it mattered. One vessel, one species, could bend the battlefield, bend technology, bend space, and bend the very rules of the universe to its will. One human ship had achieved what no empire, no alliance, no council of warlords could ever hope to accomplish. It was a quiet but absolute revelation. They had not been conquered, they had not been broken, and they had not been diminished. Their absence had been a veil, their silence a patient observation. And now, humanity had returned. The fleets remained paralyzed for hours, suspended between disbelief and awe. Senior officers frantically attempted to relay orders, to retreat, to find loopholes. Calculations were redone, strategies re-examined, theories tested. Every attempt failed. The human vessel was always one step beyond, always untouchable, always in control. The Vora admiral finally spoke aloud, voice trembling. "They are impossible." The Kithra warlord's claws dug into the bridge console. "No, no species should be able to do this. We must fire." The human vessel projected a subtle pulse. Every system aboard the Kithra flagship cut out. Engines stalled. Weapons froze mid-charge. Gravity manipulators halted. The warlord could not even move his claws. Every strike, every attempt at defiance failed before it could begin. The realization spread like wildfire. The fleets, the admirals, the warlords, the officers, every mind facing this single human ship understood the same chilling truth. This was not a threat they could fight. This was not an anomaly they could adapt to. This was a force beyond comprehension. And it was patient. A single vessel, a single species, had arrived not to slaughter, not to conquer, not to dominate, but to end a war the galaxy had believed would last forever. The human ship did not need fleets. It did not need weapons. It did not need numbers. Its control over the battlefield, its command over space, energy, and physics itself was absolute. It was proof that the galaxy had underestimated humanity, that the legends had been wrong, that the myths had lied. Humans were not fragile. Humans were not inconsequential. Humans were inevitable. In that moment, the tide of the thousand-star war began to shift. The galaxy realized that it had never faced a species like humanity before, and it feared, with a truth deeper than any weapon could inflict, that it would never face one like it again. The human vessel had proven its supremacy, yet it did not strike with violence. It did not obliterate fleets, nor did it crush planets to demand obedience. Instead, it enforced a simple, unyielding truth: the war had to end. The fleets of the Vora Dominion and the Kethra Ascendancy floated helplessly in the void, their massive weapons frozen in mid-fire, their engines cold, their communications dead. The galaxy had no recourse. Humanity had arrived, not with fire, but with control itself. Hours turned to days. Both sides attempted to regain command. Vora admirals frantically recalculated trajectories, deploying every last fail-safe backup system and hidden weapon. Kethra warlords activated secondary power cores, attempted to overload reactors, and even attempted hyperspace jumps to escape the human ship's reach. Every effort failed. The single human vessel remained, unmoving and silent, its presence unassailable. The galaxy, in its arrogance, had forgotten the most critical lesson. Humans were patient, relentless, and far smarter than any species dared imagine. The humans then began to communicate in a manner that was simultaneously terrifying and disarmingly calm. Holographic projections radiated outward from the vessel, displaying the true scale of the war's destruction. Planets reduced to molten slag, star systems stripped bare, civilizations erased from existence. Every commander, every admiral, every officer could see what would happen if the conflict continued unchecked. This was not a threat. It was evidence, logic made manifest. A ledger of consequences so stark that all pretense of bravado or arrogance crumbled in its wake. The human voice echoed through every fleet, calm yet authoritative. This war ends now. Stand down. Negotiate. Cease your hostilities or face outcomes beyond your comprehension. There was no malice. There was no vengeance. There was no attempt to dominate. But the message was undeniable. Humanity would enforce peace, and it could do so with a force greater than any weapon ever created. Initially, both sides hesitated. Fleet captains argued, admirals shouted, warlords raged. Yet no command succeeded. Systems remained inert, engines cold, weapons frozen in mid-charge. One by one, the humans did not fight with fleets. They fought with inevitability. They did not wage war with weapons. They commanded the laws of space and energy themselves. And in that command lay certainty. Resistance was meaningless. After 49 hours of immobilized fleets, paralyzed command centers, and relentless pressure from the human vessel, the galaxy's most powerful empires did what had seemed impossible just hours before. They negotiated. The Vora Dominion and Kethra Ascendancy signed peace accords, openly and without resistance. Entire fleets were decommissioned, star cracker factories dismantled, military laboratories sealed or repurposed for civilian projects. The borders of once belligerent empires were redrawn not by conquest, but by mutual agreement under the implicit supervision of the human ship. Every species involved understood that the humans had done what centuries of diplomacy and trillions of lives could not. They enforced an immediate, lasting peace. Even as they enforced peace, humanity showed restraint. Ships that had been immobilized were not destroyed. Personnel were not harmed. Colonies were left intact. Entire civilizations that had waged war for centuries were spared the devastation they had expected. Humanity demonstrated a principle the galaxy had long forgotten. The most powerful species is not one that destroys, but one that restrains itself with wisdom, patience, and calculated authority. In every corner of the battlefield, the galaxy trembled. The Kethra warlord, who had once scoffed at the humans, now bowed his head in disbelief. We have underestimated them," he whispered. The Vora admiral, long confident in the Dominion's supremacy, could only nod, eyes wide, voice choked with awe. The galaxy had misjudged humans at its peril. They were no longer ghosts, no longer myths, no longer relics of history. Humanity had returned, and they had returned as the apex arbiters of peace, as enforcers of reason, as a force the galaxy could neither challenge nor ignore. The human ship broadcast a final message across every fleet, every capital, every colony still within range. This is not conquest. This is not vengeance. This is enforcement of the truth. War ends when it threatens the innocent. Humanity does not attack unless attacked. We do not rule. We do not enslave. We do not destroy without cause. Treat all life with dignity, and you will see us no more. Harm the innocent again, and we will return. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the vessel folded space around itself and vanished. The fleets, once frozen and helpless, slowly regained power, but the lesson remained burned into every mind across the galaxy. Humans were not weak. Humans were not fragile. Humans were deliberate, patient, and unstoppable. One ship had ended a 6th-century war. One species had enforced peace across 1,000 stars. Historians would later write of the event as a miracle, a turning point, an awakening. Warlords would tell their officers that humans were to be feared, not for their weapons, but for their discipline. Diplomats would whisper in reverence about the species that had returned from myth to remind the galaxy of a single, unassailable truth. Humanity could enforce its will, silently, decisively, and without malice. The galaxy had been saved not by fleets or firepower, but by one solitary human ship, a vessel whose power lay not in destruction, but in restraint, intelligence, and the courage to act when the rest of the galaxy could not. For the first time in centuries, the stars were quiet. The 1,000-star war had ended, and the galaxy knew, in a way it would never forget, that it had barely glimpsed the true potential of humanity. The human vessel had vanished, folding space around itself with the quiet authority that had defined its return. In its absence, the galaxy trembled, not with immediate fear, but with a dawning realization. Every empire, every warlord, every fleet officer understood that they had witnessed something beyond their comprehension, a species whose restraint was as terrifying as its potential for destruction. Humanity had returned not to conquer, not to enslave, not to exact vengeance, but to enforce a principle the galaxy had long forgotten, that war was a tool, not a right, that power carried responsibility, that even the mightiest fleets were meaningless in the face of intelligence, patience, and will. The peace established by the single human ship reverberated across the stars. The Vora Dominion dismantled massive fleets, redirected warships to civilian transport and rescue missions, and began rebuilding shattered colonies. The Kethra ascendancy, long defined by conquest and assimilation, abolished forced conscription, decommissioned planetary armories, and restructured their governance to include civilian councils. Across the galaxy, smaller species once trapped in the crossfire emerged from hiding, their systems slowly coming back to life. Trade routes reopened. Communication networks, silent for decades, began to hum again. The galaxy was not rebuilt instantly, but the foundation of lasting peace was laid in the wake of humanity's single intervention. Stories of the event spread quickly. Every species, from the most advanced to the most isolated, recounted the same legend. A human ship had stopped a 6th-century war. A species, once dismissed as weak, inconsequential, and mythic, had returned to enforce order in a universe that had long lost sight of morality and restraint. The story was told in countless variations, across the academies of starship officers, within the halls of political assemblies, in whispered tales by survivors of the war. Every retelling emphasized the same lesson: the galaxy had underestimated humanity, and that mistake had nearly cost everything. Yet humanity did not remain. The ship had disappeared, and with it the presence of its species. Sol and its colonies, hidden behind imperceptible folds in space, withdrew from galactic observation once more. Humanity returned, not as rulers, but as observers, allowing the galaxy to heal itself under its own initiative. Their influence was felt but unseen. Their authority was absolute yet invisible. This withdrawal was deliberate. Humans did not need empires to command obedience. They did not need fleets to enforce law. Their return had been a demonstration, a message delivered with precision, patience, and overwhelming clarity. One ship had ended a 6th-century war. One species had enforced peace without killing, without subjugation, and without demands for dominance. The galaxy's leaders, however, did not forget. Admirals, warlords, and counselors carried the memory of that single vessel everywhere they went. Every strategic plan, every political decision, every military deployment was now framed against a new understanding. Humanity existed, and they were patient, disciplined, and utterly decisive. To provoke them would be unthinkable. To underestimate them would be fatal. In academic centers, historians recalculated the timeline of the war. Philosophers debated the moral authority of humans, analyzing how a single vessel, a single species, could enforce peace without forceful conquest. The conclusion was unanimous. Humanity had not only changed the course of a war, but had redefined the principles of power in the galaxy. True strength was not measured in fleets, weapons, or firepower. True strength was measured in restraint, intelligence, and the capacity to act with decisive precision when the universe had failed itself. Across the galaxy, younger generations of aliens grew up with this lesson ingrained. School children learned that humans were not monsters, not saviors, but a species whose existence demanded respect. They were the embodiment of potential, patience, and the possibility of restraint amidst power. In time, the story of the single human ship became a symbol, a reminder that even in a galaxy scarred by war, the unexpected could restore balance, and that the underestimated often held the ultimate authority. Some fleets maintained constant patrols along the outer borders. Some empires restructured their defense systems, and some warlords quietly retired, understanding that no ambition, no calculation, no fleet could ever challenge humanity directly. The single human ship had shifted the paradigm of the galaxy. Dominance was no longer a matter of firepower, but of understanding that some forces were beyond reckoning. And on the edges of the galaxy, in the dark folds of hidden hyperspace corridors, humanity waited. They observed, they monitored, And they learned. They did not need to interfere. Their presence alone was a reminder of the balance they had imposed. If the galaxy treated life with dignity, humans would remain invisible, letting civilizations flourish. If the galaxy chose war, cruelty, or conquest, humanity would return not as negotiators, not as diplomats, but as a force capable of reshaping the stars. One ship had done it once. One species had done it once. And that was enough. The galaxy would remember, forever, that humans were patient, intelligent, and unstoppable when provoked. The legend would echo across star systems. A single human ship turned the tide of 1,000-star war. And the galaxy would never underestimate humanity again.